Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for Intro to FinTech and Ask Me Anything with Jill and Dennis. We're going to give everyone a couple more minutes before we get started. So in the meantime, feel free to grab a drink, grab a snack, use the restroom, and we would definitely love to hear where you guys are streaming from. I know that myself, I'm in Dallas right now. Dennis is also in Dallas and Jill's in Austin. So yeah, use the chat and let us know where you're streaming from. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for Intro to FinTech and Ask Me Anything with Dennis and Jill. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of the room etiquette and information. First, if you haven't done so, please introduce yourself to the other attendees in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from, just so that way we kind of know who our audience is. And then later in the day, there's going to be a Q&A portion, and we're going to be using the live chat as well. And we're just going to bring your questions up for Jill and Dennis. And then quickly to cover the run of show, we're doing welcome remarks right now. And then after this, I'm going to introduce Jill to give a quick overview of Capital Factory and herself before we introduce Dennis and Zirtue. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring Jill up to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know Dennis and I are really excited to chat with you guys and answer all of your burning FinTech questions. I'm Jill. I'm a senior associate at Capital Factory, so I work primarily across our accelerator and our venture fund. For those of you, who have not attended a Capital Factory event before, welcome. And just to give you guys a bit of background on who we are and what we do, at Capital Factory, we call ourselves the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. So we are first and foremost a VC firm. We invest in early stage tech companies based in Texas and make a few exceptions for really awesome companies outside of Texas as well. Outside of the VC fund, we do many other things, such as events like this. We have co-working out of our Austin, Dallas, and Houston offices, and an accelerator program as well. So if you're interested in learning anything more about any of those pieces of Capital Factory, write in the comments, and we'll be happy to connect you with the right person. According to PitchBook, we are also the most active early stage investor in Texas since 2013. Just to give you guys a bit of background, in 2018, Capital Factory made 71 investments, and in 2019, we made 69 investments. So we are extremely active. Investing in Texas. But really, this all started with our CEO, Josh Baer, when he wrote the Texas Startup Manifesto. If you guys have not read it, you should. It is an awesome blog post on Medium. So just to give you guys a bit of background on the Texas Startup Manifesto, Texas is home to 4 of the 11 largest cities in the United States, and they're all within driving distance of each other. So this is Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. As a standalone economy, Texas would be the 10th largest country in the world with a GDP of 1.6 trillion. So probably a bit of where our Texas pride comes in, if you haven't realized that yet. And then more than 50 of the Fortune 500 companies are headquartered in Texas, and then 6 of the Fortune 50 are here as well. So our goal is really to connect Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and the rest of the state of Texas into this massive startup megatropolis, so we can hopefully unlock billions of dollars in capital and unleash thousands of diverse entrepreneurs into the world. So that's just a bit about us and what we do. We'd love to hear more from you guys in the comments. But with that, we'd love to bring Dennis up and get the show started.
Hey, Joe. Thank you.
Hi, Dennis. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to have everyone, hear more about you and your background. To start it off, you have such an impressive career thus far, from the Navy to IBM and PwC. Do you mind sharing with everyone just a bit about your, career and your background and what led you to start Zirtue, sorry?
Sure, no problem. First of all, thank you, and thank Capital Factory for being the center of the universe, especially with respect to Texas startups. So really appreciate you guys and appreciate the partnership there. Like you said, Jill, I started my career in the Navy as a systems engineer, setting up ship-to-shore, ship-to-ship communications, top secret clearance, working with routers, transmitters, receivers, couplers, essentially using software to tell hardware what to do, and making sure that we had 100% comms all the time. And from there, I went off to get my undergrad in computer science and my MBA in finance, and started my career with IBM building e-commerce platforms. So I'm a technologist that just happens to know a little bit about finance. And I moved over into IBM's corporate development group, where I was leading mergers, integration, carve-outs internally across different lines of businesses for IBM Global Services. Did that for several years before starting my own boutique M&A advisory firm that I ran for almost 10 years before selling that company to PwC, and then leading their M&A practice for 4 years as part of my earnout. So I've been a recovering entrepreneur ever since, and I came up with the idea for Zirtue, believe it or not, almost 8 years ago now, because my sister and other family members would borrow money from me, and I had very limited success in getting that money back. So the thought process was, there has to be a way to take the awkwardness out of this process for me as the lender, as the friend or family member that wants to help someone when they need a financial lifeline, but also help make them more accountable. And so kind of wireframed it out, but didn't do anything with it because I was obviously busy with other companies and ventures. And I was sitting around with my co-founder, Michael C. and I. We were sitting around talking. We've been threatening to do something together. And his background is in hedge fund. And so he's a finance quantitative guy. Mine's is technology. This being a fintech company, it just made sense for us to start. So started coding the application in 2018, and we launched in 2019. So,
Gotcha.
in the app stores.
Wonderful. And so, a lot of people today use platforms like a Venmo or PayPal. So tell us how Zirtue is different from, more traditional platforms that people, have probably used prior.
Yeah, so the big difference between Zirtue and really what I call payment applications is you can send someone money on Venmo or PayPal or Zelle and hope and pray you get it back. With Zirtue, before I can make a loan request to Jill, I have to first link my bank account to my Zirtue profile. And I am actually agreeing that Zirtue will draft my account each month to pay Jill back. And so with the other platforms, there's no digital promissory note, there's no infrastructure to sort of automate that loan repayment process. But with Zirtue, essentially how it works, you link your bank account, you put in the amount you want to borrow, you select the reason you want to borrow that money, and you select your friend or your family member from the contacts in your phone, and that loan request goes over to them. Once they approve it, the funds come from their bank account into your bank account. And then 30 days later, Zirtue automatically starts drafting that borrower's bank account to make sure that loan gets repaid. So vastly different from the peer-to-peer payment apps that are out there today. So,
Gotcha. Yeah. There's a lot more security and, a lot more of that, ability to get your money back, obviously, at the end of the day, which is very good. Your team has been on this incredible journey, and I'm sure when you guys first started to where you're at today is probably looks similar, but also in a lot of ways very different. And so do you mind just sharing maybe a few pivots that your team has made along the way that has really helped you guys scale faster and create the best user experience possible?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually made a few pivots over the last year, but at our core, we're the first relationship-based lending application on the market. So we're true to that functionality and true to the user experience that surrounds that. But in terms of our business model, we started out as a transaction-based business model. So we would charge roughly 5% of whatever the loan amount was. So if you took out a loan from your friend or family member for $500, Zirtue would get $25. It's a one-time fee, and you could take up to 3 years to pay that loan back. And so we realized that two things. That was a pretty costly deal for some of our users. And keep in mind, every pivot that we've made has been a result of what users have told us. Okay, so we reached out to our users, we asked them questions. What do you like? What don't you like about Zirtue? How can it be better? And the transaction fee was actually a friction point that we had to solve for. So we actually pivoted and switched to a subscription-based model in Q4 of last year. And so since then, we've been focused more on that MRR versus tying ourselves to the transaction. The other thing that we've done in terms of pivot is that we realize that lending and borrowing money is not an everyday event that people do every day. And so what our users, again, have told us is that, look, love your app. Wish I had this 10 years ago. I would actually still have some relationships that I don't have today. But it would be nice to have some functionality that I can use on a more regular basis. And that's where the Zirtue MasterCard debit card came into play with that partnership with MasterCard and Galileo and Central Bank of Kansas City. So we're basically going to be launching the Zirtue card next month and allow our users to actually get their funds sooner rather than later, because today we're ACH to ACH. So with the Zirtue card, once those funds get approved by your friend or family member, you instantly get those funds on your Zirtue card that you can start using. So
very interesting.
We'll
yeah, well, let us know when the Zirtue card goes live. I'm sure we have a few people
I will.
that would love to use it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can go to the website now and join the wait list as well. So
well, hurry up and get on it, y'all. We need it. Wonderful. So I was, just scrolling through the news and was reading about, one of the latest updates for your company. One of your current investors, who's also a Dallas Cowboys linebacker, Jalen Smith, was speaking with the Dallas News about really closing this wealth gap by investing in minority entrepreneurs. And something he referenced that I thought was interesting is, many families of color are really hit hard by payday loans with interest rates that can reach up to 400%. And he talked about Zirtue being a leader and really helping close this wealth gap that affects, families of color. So can you talk to us more about how Zirtue is helping people of color achieve this economic equality that they're really striving for?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're super excited about the relationship with Jalen and MEI Capital Fund and their investment. It's just a huge endorsement, but I think above and beyond that, there are just a lot of real good synergies between what MEI Capital Fund is doing in terms of seeking to close the wealth and the education gap, and what Zirtue is doing in terms of driving financial inclusion, one relationship at a time. And so all of these things come together. So there's some really good synergies that we're pretty excited about, and we think are going to be able to produce some very good fruit there as well. So in terms of that relationship, I think it's something that's near and dear to my heart because I grew up in the housing projects in Monroe, Louisiana. And so I came from very humble beginnings, and I know what pawn shops and payday loans and these other type of places do to the Black communities in particular. It may seem like they're helping, but when you really sort of look at it and peel back the onion, it does nothing to help those communities. It just takes them into this vicious vortex that they can't get out of, to be honest with you. And there's nothing fair and equitable about a 400% payday loan or anything comparable to that. So I'm not a fan of payday lenders, and certainly Zirtue is a much better alternative. With your friends and family, we have a fixed interest rate at 5%. That gets amortized over the life of the loan, and that goes straight to your friend or family member. And we do that to make sure everyone stays compliant because of the IRS, IRC codes. And then once you get above 5%, you start to lose a couple of states in terms of usury laws. So we were very intentional at Zirtue, at least, in terms of making sure we built our platform to support the people that needed a financial lifeline at a fair and equitable interest rate. So, yeah.
Very good, very good. And kind of switching over to the funding side of this, you guys recently closed a $1 million seed round last fall. Congratulations! That's great timing coming to 2020, which has been quite a year to say the least. And one thing that's been really hit hard is obviously the VC markets. They've been down roughly 35%. I'm curious, as you guys look to perhaps maybe raise a Series A or convertible notes along the way, have you noticed a tighter fintech funding environment? And if so, we'd love to hear more about it and just your thoughts on funding in fintech.
Yeah. So no, first of all, thank you for that, Jill. We actually oversubscribed that 1 million. We actually closed 1.5 million.
Oh, congratulations! That's even better.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we're pretty excited about that. A lot of that had to do with Jalen Smith, with his investment in the MEI Capital guys. That helped close it out. So we're at 1.5 million for our seed round. We have not, that being said, we have not seen a slowdown in investment activity or at least interest from investors and VC firms. In fact, we're talking to several VC firms now with respect to Series A. So those are very active conversations that we're having. We're exchanging a lot of information, going through all the diligence and everything else as part of this process. So we feel very bullish about sort of where we are. And I'm not sure if some of that has to do with the fact that this is fintech, and fintech is just a hot space right now. And I also think it has a lot to do, with Zirtue and the business model and the team that Michael and I have put together as well, because I do think you have to have the right team to be able to execute on this. And I think some of that is resonating based on our traction that we've had to date. So we've been fortunate and blessed that we haven't seen that. Now, that being said, we know that investments in fintech since Q2 of last year have been on a major decline globally. And so I think investments are dropping at least 2 to 3 billion in terms of fintech dollars each quarter. but Zirtue hasn't seen or felt any of that. But again, we've just been focused on growing the business, scaling the business, and adding as much value as possible so that if and when we do have those conversations with investors, it's a much more easier conversation for us to have. So.
Mm-hmm. For sure, for sure. Well, I'm glad to hear that, you guys have not seen a slowdown in the funding environment. That's really positive to hear. But obviously, you guys have a great product, great team, and fantastic traction. Yeah. So I'm sure that's a good majority of it. One thing I was really curious to chat about with you is, fintech and just the regulations and red tape around the industry. I know you started Zirtue in the wake of a new administration change. Which policies of the new administration do you think presented opportunities or perhaps even challenges for fintech companies? And what can fintech companies expect going into, a potential administration change this fall?
With respect to this fall, I'm not sure. We'll have to see who wins, right? I think that's still a big TBD right there. In terms of this administration, they've been very fintech friendly, and by that, I mean, they're financial services and institution friendly. And so it's been good. I mean, this administration has actually been really good for fintech. They've given banks permission, if you will, to do more partnerships with fintech companies, which is why you see a lot of these sort of neo banks like Chime and Simple and others popping up. Because banks are trying to figure out, especially your regional and your community banks, they're trying to figure out new and creative ways to stay relevant. And by that, you have to grow your AUM, and fintechs are actually a good way for them to do that because, they're partnering with these banks like BBVA and Bancorp and other folks. So from that perspective, it makes sense. But I still think it's quite hard if you are a fintech company to get a bank charter, right? That's still not easy. The FDIC is still forcing fintech companies to jump through a lot of hoops and submit a lot of applications. And it could be a 3 to 5 year process before that happens. So I don't think we're at that point where fintechs are going to replace banks. So I say that to say that there's a place for banks, there's a place for fintech, and I think we're sort of starting to figure that out as we speak. I think Viral was one of the first banks here. They recently got their bank charter approved, but that was after almost 3 or 4 years of multiple applications and just a slow and painful process. Now, that being said, Zirtue has no interest in being a bank, and I don't think most fintech companies do. I do think most fintech companies are really focused on creating a better user experience that banks can't provide or won't provide for whatever reason. And so I think that's why you see a lot of users gravitate toward fintech companies. And I don't see this administration doing anything to slow that down. I think if and when we do have a change of administration, I think the policies around that will be more around user privacy and security and data and how fintech companies are storing this information and using that information. We're already starting to see some of those laws come into fruition out of California. So we'll start to see a little bit more of that at the federal level, but Zirtue is just taking a proactive approach to that. And we're sort of self-regulating ourselves here. And so we are obsessed with security and user data. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear. I know it's been a topic that's been on a lot of people's minds, over the last few years in particular. And, really going off of that, do you see evidence where the U.S. regulatory environment is hindering the future growth of the fintech industry and, any way in particular? And what regulatory hurdles in particular has Zirtue had to overcome, in order to achieve what you guys have to date?
Yeah, so as a fintech company, there are plenty of compliances that we have to follow. Okay, so we have to follow Know Your Customer, KYC, the anti-money laundering laws, AML. And so everything we do, we have to make sure that every user on our platform is who they say they are, okay? Because what we don't want, especially for Zirtue, because we don't want someone on our platform pretending to be Dennis asking Jill for a $2,000 loan, right? And Jill approves that loan thinking that it's Dennis. So it's extremely important above and beyond the regulatory stuff that we protect the integrity of the platform first and foremost, because that feeds down and bleeds into the user experience. But I think in terms of what we should be concerned with, I don't think the federal government has any interest in stifling fintech at this stage, but I do think there are some threats at the state level, and those will be on an individual basis because they make their own laws that we have to respond to. So.
Okay. Got you. Very interesting. Well, I'd like to open the conversation up to know more about just the fintech market as a whole. Some of these questions are actually coming in from people who signed up on our Eventbrite page. But what fintech trend emerged this year that wasn't on your radar in previous years, and why are you excited about some of these new trends?
A couple, but I would probably say business banking, commercial banking companies like Brex.com, for example, are really going after the commercial banking space by way of their charge cards, right? So there's really no credit check or anything like that, but you can get it's a business card, but it's essentially a quasi business line of credit because it's based on your business bank balance or your bank account, which they have access through companies like Plaid and other platforms that give them that access. And so they've actually carved out an interesting little niche for themselves, especially when it comes to small, medium-sized businesses that don't want to jump through all the commercial hoops and red tapes with their local bank. Brex has really done a good job in just creating that a really good user experience and a really good user interface, and it's real-time stuff. So I've been really interested and curious to see that pop up, right? Because that tells me that there's going to be more of those type of businesses coming. And you see that a lot too with companies like Brex and companies like Cabbage. Cabbage offers lines of credit to businesses based on their last 6 months of statements versus your future earnings and what you're currently doing. So so that's an interesting space to me. Not one that I want to get into, by the way, but I just find it interesting. So
yeah, no, a ton of exciting opportunities and plenty of room in the market for people to tackle them. Something that I've noticed in my role in particular is that I haven't seen I'm coming from venture in New York, by the way, just for a little bit of context there. But, while I was working in New York, I saw a lot of fintech companies, but I have to say I haven't seen quite as many come across my desk in the Austin area. Most of the fintech companies are obviously born out of New York. A lot of the big banks are headquartered there or the New Jersey area. But in your opinion, what makes Texas a great place to start a fintech company?
Well, it's all the things that you talked about earlier, that Josh talked about in his manifesto, in terms of just Texas just being just really good breeding ground for all these companies. And I think it's primarily due to the fact that there's so much intellectual capital here that companies, startups can tap into. There's so much actual capital. Now, whether that capital is going to startups and tech startups in particular, the way that it does in Silicon Valley, we're not there yet. But I think Capital Factory is playing a major role in shifting some of that mindset so that those investment dollars can start to go into tech companies that are Texas-based. So I don't think that New York or Chicago has a monopoly on fintech companies or concepts. I think everything comes down to your ability to start a business, create a viable business model around that, and then execute on that and scale that business as fast as you can. Break a few things along the way, but on the other side of it, you're a much better entrepreneur, and your investors are much better off, and your users feel a lot better because they've had a good experience with you. I think as long as those things are top of mind, that's not a geo thing. That's not a location thing. I don't have to be in Chicago to start and grow a successful fintech company, or any company for that matter. And there's so much talent in Texas. It's a centralized location. I can get anywhere in the country in 3 hours or less. I'm not traveling right now, but it's certainly just a really good place. And and I have my own sort of opinions about Silicon Valley, but we can come back to that later.
Well, feel free to share any that come to mind. I'm not sure if you have any Silicon Valley based.
No. I'm actually talking to investors out of Silicon Valley, so I don't want to offend anyone. But I will say this though. I do think that parts of Silicon Valley has to die in order for technology to live and thrive to that next level, because I just think there's certain parts about that model that just don't work. And I think the net needs to be casted a lot wider. To your point, Texas, wherever the talent is where the dollar should be. So
for sure. I mean, we're seeing so many people come to Austin right now, and obviously it's probably slowed down a little bit since the pandemic hit, and people are wanting to just stay put, not make any big decisions at the time. But prior to COVID, there's a ton of people coming to Austin. I mean, most of the companies that I was looking at and that were coming across my desk were not Austin-based founders, and ones that were looking to relocate. So it's exciting to see. We're happy to have more people coming down here.
Absolutely. Bring it on.
Yeah, I know, right? We need more people, but I'm curious, what fintech company outside of your own? I'm sure it's obviously your baby, and you care about it a lot. But which company outside of your own do you admire the most, and why?
Zirtue 2.0. No, I'm just kidding. Besides Zirtue, I still like the aggregators. I like the marketplaces. So when I look at companies like NerdWallet, that sort of bring everything together for a user, so they're not forced to go to 100 different websites or places. They could sort of get everything in one place. I still think there's a lot of value to be had there, and a lot of ways to scale that business. I do like some of the neo banks like Chime. I'm really impressed with how they've been able to scale and grow since I think they launched in 2013, and they're at almost 10 million users now. So that's been impressive to watch. It's not necessarily the business Zirtue wants to be in, totally different business model, but certainly impressed with how they've been able to execute. So
absolutely, NerdWallet is a very cool company. Love keeping up with them and reading all their cool blogs. All right, audience, get ready to start submitting more questions. I already have a few from you all that I'll make sure to read off to Dennis. But last question I have for you, Dennis, is for those of us that are in the audience, maybe looking to start a fintech company. What advice would you give them, and also how would that advice change in this post-COVID world?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jill, and it's a hard question to answer for the broader audience because everyone's so different. So I don't make these assumptions that my advice is just blanket advice that anyone can apply. But I will say this: if you're gonna start anything, make sure that it's tied to some purpose or some passion. I started Zirtue to solve a very specific problem and pain point that I had, but also to help drive financial inclusion for people who may need a financial lifeline from time to time. And, especially, because what I've learned just since we've started Zirtue is Americans do help each other in times of crisis, including pandemics. And so we've seen a spike in user growth, loan activity, and everything else. But we think above and beyond this pandemic, people are still going to look for ways to help each other. And Zirtue wants to just play a small part in that. And so if you have a purpose, if you have a passion, make sure you have a plan to execute on it. And if you don't, find a partner who can help you do that. And probably the last piece of advice would be invest in yourself before you ask others to invest in you. So whatever your business is, try to go out and prove it, come up with some proof of concept, some MVP, minimum viable product, get some traction, get someone to pay you, some user, some company to buy it or say, yes, I will sign up for this, because that helps. It helps it will add a lot of integrity to the conversation you're going to have with future investors. And so I'm a huge believer you should invest in yourself first before you ask anyone else.
Absolutely. It's hard to argue with that advice. Very sound
Yeah.
advice. And a few questions that have come in from the audience. The first one is, why are large finance companies so slow to take on new tech? Do you think it's due to expenses, training, perhaps inertia? And is there a Netflix versus blockbuster technology on the horizon? That's a big question.
Yeah. So first part of that question is big banks cannot innovate as fast as startups or fintech companies. And they know this, they admit this. And I equate banks, me being an old Navy guy, I equate banks to being an aircraft carrier, right? If I'm going to turn that aircraft carrier around, that could literally take me an hour to do. Okay. That's how slow aircraft carriers are versus a fast frigate or a destroyer or something, which could just whip through there. And so that's what startups are. And so speed is very important. Now, I will say this, some of the challenges that we run into partnering with banks, and we've been partnering with banks since we launched, they don't move at our speed. So we have to come up with creative ways to help them move faster. So I just think it's baked into their culture. It's in their DNA. A lot of these guys are still on mainframe systems. So there's not a huge sense of urgency because all of the regulatory legal is there to make sure that they are around, right? And so there's no sense of urgency for them on that respect. And so second part of that question was, is there a Netflix
Net versus blockbuster technology on the horizon?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say banks should start figuring out a way to invest more in these fintech companies that they're partnering up with. And by that, I mean they should be hedging. Okay. And so if you're partnering up with a Chime, if you're partnering up with a Simple or Zirtue, you should figure out a way to become an equity partner in those companies as well, because at some point, and it's possible, there could be a shift in the administration. There could be a shift in sort of the regulatory and compliance things that make it a lot easier for some of these fintech companies to get bank charters. And I think once that starts happening on enough scale, that becomes a major threat to these banks, especially the regional ones. So if I were banks, I would hedge a little bit. If I were Blockbuster back in the day, I would have bought half of Netflix. So, yeah.
That is true. That's really interesting to hear your thoughts on it. The second question we have is, what are your thoughts on challenger banks and on their recent efforts to get a banking license? For example, SoFi and Varo.
Well, it's going to be a long road. If you're in the U.S. and you're a challenger bank or neobank, the regulation isn't there yet to support your efforts. Now, they're saying, hey, we are accepting applications. Okay, that's great. But they make it such a slow and painful process that it actually turns off a lot of these challenger banks, right? That's not the case in Europe, especially in the UK. Challenger banks have been wildly successful in their ability to get charters because the regulation there supports that. So you see companies like Revolut, N26, and these other challenger banks popping up all over Europe because there's the legislation there to support it. We're just not there here in the U.S. yet. I think the U.S. wants to do that, but I think lobbying is still a real thing, and it's just one of those things. So they really do make it slow and painful. Doesn't mean that you can't do it. Varo, they just got their bank charter, but you should just expect it to be a 3 to 5 year process.
Very interesting. We have a question from our YouTube channel from Joseph Wade. He asked, what are some publications or newsletters you read to keep up with fintech?
Oh man, I read The Economist all the time. I read TechCrunch. I'm always on Crunchbase. Sort of my go-to just to keep up with the activity more so than anything else. Pitch book as well. But it's really about what activity is going on in this space. And by that, I mean, who's buying who and who's selling what, right? And so it's important for me to keep my finger on the pulse of that, to understand, not just, I mean, so for me to understand where the market is going, I always follow the dollars. And so I do keep up with certain publications all the time. So. Yeah.
And you can always join our FinTech AMAs that go on. We have these generally about once a month, and always chat with another founder that is in the FinTech space. So join more of them.
Absolutely.
Sure and another question we have coming in from Eventbrite. Could you please speak about important setbacks during your entrepreneurship journey? How important has your network been during your journey?
Extremely important. I would not be where I am today without my network. So, and the thing about networking is you don't want to wait until you need those resources to start networking. It's just not the way networking works. And I think you have to figure out what your style of networking is. A lot of people have what I call a shotgun approach to networking. I have more of a personal approach. I don't have a whole lot of folks in my network. But I'm very intentional about building those relationships and being intentional about making sure we actually have a real relationship versus a email or LinkedIn relationship. So my network is 80% personal. Okay. And by the way, when I form these relationships, or when they form these relationships with me, there was no ask. I didn't need anything, didn't want anything from them. It was more, let's get to know each other, figure out where the downstream opportunities are later. But networking is about just genuinely wanting to get to know someone because, there's something about them that you may have in common, or something about them that you respect or admire, or maybe there is something down the road, but you're not there yet. But certainly, I would say almost never come out the gate making an ask, because that just, I just think that's rude.
Way to build relationships, just being on the asking end all the time. And network is obviously, so much, just it really helps in every way possible. I know in the venture community, it's huge. Obviously in startups, it's huge, but we all need help along the way, regardless if that's, business or just life. So
absolutely.
Completely agree with all of that. We have another question from our audience. Do large legacy financial companies and institutions see blockchain technology as a potentially radical shift or a new feature? I'm sure it depends on who you ask as well.
Yeah, it does. Radical shift. Now, when you say blockchain technology, I'm thinking of that in the context of smart contracts, ledgers, et cetera. I'm not thinking in terms of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or anything like that. I think that's a whole separate conversation in terms of those fiats and all that. So when I think of blockchain, I do think there are multiple use cases out there that could be applied. In fact, IBM has made millions, if not billions of dollars worth of investment into their blockchain platform, as have a lot of other companies. Now, I don't know where we are with respect to the adoption of blockchain, because you can use smart contracting. Even if you think about the HR process, in terms of onboarding new employees, signing agreements, exiting, equity agreements, or new contracts with vendors and third parties and things like that through this distributed network. And it's highly secure. I just don't know where we are in terms of adoption. It's going to take a company, maybe a startup, that has the right sort of toolkit, if you will, that makes it extremely easy for companies to adopt. And I think everything comes down to user adoption. So I just haven't seen what that product is yet. I do think companies like Coinbase and other companies that have sort of managed to sort of aggregate sort of different types of cryptocurrency into one place, and in a place that people can trust, versus all these other crypto mining fields that are out there. because people do lose their money in cryptocurrency, and it's still not secure, and there's no guarantee. It's not backed by the FDIC. So, but I would say that if you have a concept around blockchain itself, go for it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have a question from Morgan Odell on our YouTube channel. She asks, how do you best gain customer discoveries with B2B companies? How do you price the product for those customers? And more specifically, where to begin the offering?
Yeah, so start with what are the customers paying today for the services that's comparable or equivalent to what you're offering. And then make sure you understand what pain point you're solving, okay? Because that's going to kind of give you a sense of what the value is or what the value should be. And I've always sort of erred on the side, I'd rather start high in terms of my offering because it's easy for me to give them a discount than it is for me to raise the price on them and or my fees. And so with B2B, I think that's kind of going back to your other question earlier, Jill. I have hundreds of really good, friendships and networking and relationships from my old M&A days with C-suite executives. And so it's easy for me to walk into a Fortune 100 company and get a meeting, right? And so, I mean, I don't take that for granted, but I would say this, that if you're not the person to get you in that door, hire someone who can get you in the door and get those meetings, because and then it's up to you to make your business case, right, in terms of what you're offering and where the value proposition is, because every company needs to know right up front what's in it for me. I understand you want to sell me something, but what's in it for me? So if you take Zirtue, for example, we give our users the option to pay their creditors directly through the app with the funds that they borrow. Okay. And so our first partner was AT&T, and our pitch to them was very simple. Look, you send us users, we send you money. So anyone who's 30, 60, 90 days past due, before you write them off, why don't you try to leverage Zirtue as an alternative payment solution? Okay. Yeah. So that's my pitch. That's the value proposition. It's simple, it's direct, and it resonates. So.
Absolutely. Well, going off of that, we actually have a question from Mike through our YouTube channel. You were discussing, about you can actually leverage your connections that you have from, your M&A days and, your days at the big Fortune companies. So Mike is asking, at what point should a fintech company connect with a bank?
What's your product? Yeah, I think it just depends, Mike. And I would say this, depending on the core feature of your product, some of that may require a bank connection or relationship or API. And so with us, we needed those bank relationships early before we can go live, because we did not want to set ourselves up as a bank or as an FBO for the benefit of, because we're moving a lot of money, between users. And so it was important for us to have the relationship day one. And so they were part of our development process. Okay. So I would say very early, and you certainly want to make sure that if you think you're going to need a bank relationship down the road, you start having those conversations now so that you even know that it's a viable option as well.
Very good. And we have another question on our YouTube channel from KKCRVRA. She asks, he asks, are you thinking about developing other financial services like SoFi?
No. We have no desire to do what SoFi is doing. I think they're I think that's a totally different business model, by the way. And it would be a totally different app from what Zirtue does. We are committed to our core functionality, and that is we simplify loans between friends and family, and we automate the repayment process. That's what Zirtue does. Now, if someone needs to borrow money to pay their student loans, okay, then Zirtue is the right platform for you to do that. But if you're looking to refinance your student loans or mortgages or things like that, we don't see ourselves pivoting into that space.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. And we actually have a follow-up question from Mike. He said that was very great feedback. Great job. He wants to know, who at the bank should he be thinking of approaching?
Who's a bank you should be thinking about approaching? Man, any regional bank. I mean, especially if you already have a relationship with one. But the best thing to do is, I would Google fintech regional banks and see what regional banks come up, and just start reaching out to them, because what that says is they have some sort of program in place where they're looking to partner with fintech companies. And depending on your business and your model, it may or may not be a good fit. So it's not about just going out and teaming up with the first bank that you come across. That would be a mistake. I would advise you to look at least half a dozen banks, talk to them over a course of weeks, and figure out which one really fits, not just your business model, but your time frame, how they work, how they support you. Just look at it from end to end. So.
For sure. We have a question from Nisha on our YouTube channel. She asks, can you name a few other Texas-based fintech startups we should know about? Do we have enough to say we have a cluster here in Texas?
No, that's a good question. I can't. So I would say no to your second question.
Like a bubble here of companies.
Yeah. And you say in Texas, fintech. I don't know, Jill. What about you? You're closer to this than I am.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that I work too heavily with many fintech companies. We've probably had a few come across our radar. Actually, a few out of San Antonio, interestingly enough. It's I wouldn't say that I've come across a lot, though. We do have one of our partners, Brian Chambers, though, that exited a fintech company, and it's an industry that's near and dear to his heart. So he works a lot more closely in that area. Sees a little bit more of it out of Dallas than we probably do in Austin.
Well, that's true, and I'm sure Brian Chambers would know for sure, because he talks to so many companies and he remembers every conversation. So
I know, it's kind of scary.
Mm-hmm.
Too funny. We have two more questions from our audience, and then we can wrap it up. Don't want to take up too much of your time today.
Sure,
the first question is, what are the different verticals and areas in fintech?
Oh, man. Well, verticals, I mean, there's P2P payments, there's marketplaces you can have, there's aggregators. And when I think of verticals in terms of fintech, I think of sort of subsectors within a space. It's really about what's the financial service that you're going to offer, how does your business model work, and by that I mean, how do you make money, and how do users sort of how do you scale those users based on that business model? But I think you have to start at the top level, figure out if you're going to be a B2C fintech or B2B, or combination of both, which is what Zirtue is. We're B2B2C, and then from there you start to kind of break it down into what your specific space needs to be. So a consumer lending is really the space that Zirtue falls into in terms of fintech space. We just have a very different way of approaching consumer lending. So.
Very good. And last question from Terry on our YouTube channel. We'll end with a funny one. Other than drinking heavily, how do you handle no when you make a pitch? I know founders get a lot of no's before they get a yes, so we'd love to hear your feedback on this.
Wow. I mean, a no is a no. It's just a word to me, to be honest with you. I don't take no's personal, and I don't get overly excited about the yes, because there's still so much work to be done. And by the way, yes means now I have to go deliver. And so I think, if I hear no, I don't take it personal. It just may not be the right time, may not be the right investment. And by the way, we have said no to investors, right? So the no works on both sides of the table, as it should. I would say, don't just go out looking for money. Don't just go out looking for customers and partners, because you don't want to have to fire investors. You don't want to have to fire customers and partners. So make those decisions in a very meaningful and responsible way. And it's really not about the money, because once you get the money, you have to deliver on that. And you have to make sure you have the right partners. So with Zirtue, we always look for partners that have experience in this space. Okay. And that's because we want our investors to be sort of lifetime partners with us, whether they invest in Series A, B, or C or not. We think there's value that they bring to the table. And so for that reason, we're interested in them being investment partners with us. But I can tell you, we have told quite a few people no as well. So.
I know it's not an easy thing to do, obviously, to tell investors no. And one thing that I always tell founders I work with is they should do just as much diligence on the investors that they're looking for as the investors are doing on them. It's, it definitely goes both ways. But it can obviously be scary saying no. So I'm just curious on your end, one last question, we can wrap it up.
Sure.
This is fun getting to ask all these questions. I'm learning so much from you. But when you know it's the right time to say no to an investor and, maybe pass up on the opportunity to receive capital that you're not guaranteed that you might get from another investor?
I think fairly early on, whether you admit it or not, fairly early on. Now, I tell people all the time, investors or anyone, I'd rather have a fast no than a slow yes. So what I try to do is give investors and other people that I know I'm going to say no to that same courtesy. And I try not to drag the no out. It's just, look, this is, it's not a good fit or whatever it is, but I'm very direct with them, and my grandfather used to always tell me when I got in trouble, bad news never gets better with time. So just put it out there, and people will respect you a lot more because, you put it out there and you were honest and open with them. So I would say as soon as let them know, even if it's, hey, I'm not feeling good about this, and maybe we should talk about it, or because I don't feel good about it, I'm just not going to do it. And so now we'll say this, there have been a few investors that have taken that very personal. So expect that and be okay with that. So
yeah, I guess investors probably aren't as used to getting told no. It was probably good for developing character, I'm sure.
That's right.
Well, Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope
everyone
just as much as I did.
I did.
You have such an impressive career and background, and everyone, don't forget the Zirtue card is coming out soon. So Dennis, keep us up to date on when it's coming out.
Get on the wait list.
Yes, for sure. Go sign up on the website. But thank you everyone for joining us. We have a ton of events coming up in the future, so subscribe to the YouTube channel if you'd like to be updated on when those events are. Other than that, we're excited that you guys all joined us today, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
All right. Thank you.